Okay, this is the first assignment for Chapter 7. These are reading questions. They are chronological, they are in order. Just read through Chapter 7 and answer the questions. I would like to make a short comment here about all the images that are embedded in these worksheets. They are in the public domain, and if you actually follow on the PDF or on the Word document, most of these images, if you click on them, the links are embedded. So if you are interested in knowing a little bit more about where the source or documentation on the source, that is embedded within the worksheet. So anyway, this is just a short introduction, and there are some hints as you go through this video, some hints and some additional explanation to some of the questions. As you work through this worksheet, I'd like to pay a little bit of attention to some of these questions here, numbers 8 and 9 in particular. So I want to take a look at this quote from the book, and I really think that this is well written. So it talks about, in theory, the British mercantile system seemed thoroughly selfish and deliberately oppressive, but in truth, in 1763, the various navigational laws imposed no intolerable burden, mainly because they were only loosely enforced. So, enterprising colonial merchants learned early to disregard or evade troublesome restrictions. And I really think it's interesting if you look at this last sentence here, John Hancock in particular, wholesale smuggling. John Hancock at the time was probably known as the richest man in America, and he would benefit immensely from America becoming independent. Wouldn't have to pay as many taxes as the British were requiring. So when number 8 asks the question, how were some of the first American fortunes amassed, you can just put down amassed. Some of them, of course, were amassed by wholesale smuggling. Alright, then if we jump down to the next question here, number 9, I also like the way that this is written here. When painted in the rosiest colors, the mercantile system burdened the colonialists with annoying liabilities. Mercantilism stifled economic initiative and imposed a rankling dependency on British agents and creditors. So we also talk about then here, this is the continuing statement. Most grievously, many Americans simply found the mercantilist system debasing, and they felt used. They felt like they were being kept in a perpetual economic adolescence. They were never allowed to be able to come of age. This, I think, is important. It almost felt like to the British colonists, the American colonists, that the British were not allowing them to get their economic independence. They were constantly being kept in this perpetual state of economic adolescence. So this then is Benjamin Franklin's quote to answer number 9. And the question is, from the words of Benjamin Franklin, we have an old mother that peevish is grown, she snubs us like children that scarce walk alone, she forgets we're grown and have a sense of our own. And of course the mother that Benjamin Franklin is referring to is the British. Now, as we get a little bit further in the chapter, we all know the story that the American colonialists are going to claim that British are tyrannically abusing their power. The king in particular is abusive, tyrannical, and unjust, in particular in his approach to taxation without representation. And so when we get to this idea of taxation without representation, there's this whole concept of virtual representation versus actual representation. Hopefully you can pick up on that within the textbook. Virtual versus actual representation. And the notion that the British Parliament virtually takes into consideration all of the colonists' needs. And so the colonists are virtually represented. But the colonists felt that they needed physical representation. They wanted to physically send representatives from the colonists across the Atlantic Ocean to sit into Parliament. Now, this is kind of a difficult thing to appreciate because let's take a look at this. This is kind of the answer to number 14. And I want to take a close look at this. So, the Americans scoffed at this notion of virtual representation. The British were saying that the Americans were virtually represented. The Americans scoffed at this notion. Truthfully, they did not really want direct representation. So right there, this is pretty important. They scoffed, they made fun of the fact that the British said they were virtually represented, and they wanted actual representation. At least they wanted it vocally. But here, truthfully, they did not really want this actual or direct representation in Parliament. And the question is, why? So this idea that if they actually were directly represented, would a tax measure pass? So think about this for a second. If Parliament allowed for the American colonists to send representatives, they would be severely outnumbered. Then they could have an actual vote, taxation vote, and the colonists would be severely outvoted. And so this principle of no taxation without representation was supremely important, and the colonists clung to it with tenacious consistency. But we still go back to this: did they actually want it? So think about that a little bit, and that is kind of a difficult concept to look at, but that's kind of the answer to number 14. See if you can play with that a little bit. And continuing then, as you look here, I want you to take a look at this guy here, and Samuel Adams. Samuel Adams, in the idea that Samuel Adams is one of the number 21, the master of propaganda, Samuel Adams. And see what you think of that. Does Samuel Adams kind of fan the flames of the Bostonites, if not all colonialists or colonists? Now, as we move into question number 23, what was the chief function of some of the committees that were set up across Massachusetts? I want to take a look at this statement here. Samuel Adams' single contribution was to organize Massachusetts into local committees of correspondence, and after he had formed the first one in Boston, some 80 towns continued similar organizations, and their chief function was to spread the spirit of resistance. Okay, and then look at this. I like this, the way the author states this. One critic referred to these committees as the foulest and most venomous serpent ever issued from the egg of sedition. So those are the answers to question 23 and 24. but the way that Samuel Adams was very much of an instigator in this whole idea of getting the colonists fired up. Now his cousin, John Adams, was a little bit more of a level-headed lawyer, not necessarily the foulest, venomous serpent. John Adams was much more of a level-headed attorney, and interestingly enough, he was one of the lead defendants for the British soldiers in the Boston Massacre. Now, on the last page here, of course, again, these are some famous images. It's a very famous image talking about the various colonies needing to join together to fight against the British or die. And then the unanimous Declaration of Independence, the idea that John Hancock, just make sure you understand, John Hancock is the first signature on the Declaration of Independence, because John Hancock is the first and second Continental Congress president. So he is in charge of these Continental Congresses that make the Declaration. The Constitution has not been written. The United States is not organized, so we do not have a President of the United States yet. George Washington is the first president. John Hancock is the first kind of president of the Continental Congresses. And the richest man, the richest smuggler in America, benefits probably the most from our independence. I want you to take a look and spend some time looking and comparing the British, the imperial strengths, with some of the weaknesses that existed, and then lastly look at some of the American pluses and minuses that existed. Please do not hesitate to email me or give me a call if you have any questions about this assignment, but this is just a short kind of outline, questions chronologically put together that go with Chapter 7.